Hi there, I'm Liz Linehan, your state representative. This is Liz Linehan's News You Can Use, The Truth About Tolls, Part 2. All right, I am back here with Representative Roland Lemar, who is the chairman of the Transportation Committee, and we have Scott Shepard, policy director of the Yankee Institute. Thank you both for being here. In our previous show, we got pretty fired up about tolls, but I believe that we're doing a really great job of separating fact and fiction. I will say that we got a lot real heavy into the past and the policy. Now I want to talk about what's moving forward and what it's going to mean for the residents of the state of Connecticut. So with that, I want to talk about a couple of quick questions that we've seen out there, and we're going to do rapid fire answers, and let's see if you guys agree, okay? Sure. What about the feds will cut our funding if we institute tolls?
Completely inaccurate.
Not relevant.
Ooh, curveball.
Yeah.
Why is it not relevant?
It's not relevant because the question isn't whether our funding is going to get cut. The question is what follows from the fact that our current federal funding isn't going to get cut, which means what follows from it
I'm not going to let you do that,
is a
Scott.
very limited amount of tolling that's very different than the plan that's being sold to the state right now.
So that's not the question I asked.
I know,
it's a simple yes or no. Will the feds cut our funding if we institute tolls?
That's not the relevant question.
But that's not the answer I'm allowing you to give. We'll try one more time. Yes or no, will the feds cut our funding if we institute tolls?
They would if it was instituted the way that it's currently being proposed.
So let's go back to Representative Lemar.
Yes.
So the feds will not cut funding if we do what?
If we violate the waiver provisions that the federal government is granting us.
And what are those waiver provisions?
That we have a congestion pricing plan in place. We've qualified under federal policy for a value pricing program, which is to help alleviate congestion along our major corridors. We're recognizing that it's a huge hindrance to business growth, the amount of time our workers are spending stuck in traffic, that we're not moving goods and services along the corridors as quickly, as efficiently as we should. And so we qualify solely because we can alleviate congestion, create economic opportunity, and improve quality of life by having a congestion pricing program.
Okay, congestion pricing means that we are going to make one lane, that is the so-called Cadillac lane, that you pay $30 in order to go in this one lane. True or false?
Completely false.
True or false?
No, that's true. That's not what we're doing.
It's false! That's it. I'm done. This is my show. Just kidding. Okay, so you're a real sport. I like you. So, all right. So, another quick question. Oh my God.
Wait, hold on a second.
Yeah.
So we've gotten that we qualify broadly under, we're one of the states that's allowed to propose things under congestion pricing. That doesn't mean that the proposal that the governor and proponents of tolls are propagating has been pre-approved. All
right.
we can do is bring things under a congestion pricing program. And the thing to notice about a congestion pricing program is, as the name presupposes, they're only going to approve places where there's genuine daily congestion, or if there's rush hour congestion, tolling for those periods where there's rush hour congestion. The quiet corner of the state doesn't need congestion tolling, and there's no reason to believe that we're going to get approval for that.
Is that true?
That is mostly true, actually, and that's why we don't actually have a tolling program that's proposed for the quiet corner of the state. And in fact, we're only looking at 91, 95, Merritt Parkway, and I-84.
Well, 84 runs into the quiet corner.
It does, and the proposals do not have for high congestion pricing throughout that area. It would only be administered in a way that would allow for us to reduce congestion along.
Well, that's the last map I think that we've seen publicly is one that covers 84, that covers 95, that covers the eastern half of 95.
Yes.
That covers 84 and it covers parts of 15. Now it sounds like what's going on at the Capitol is no longer that map. that there's
And any program we come up
concentration
with
and
has to
decrease.
meet the federal requirements. So that's why we have to start this process.
Right.
And like what's been happening for the last few years is they've blocked even the process of getting that federal approval. We have to get a federal approval waiver before we can implement anything.
So let's explain what
Yeah.
that means, because this is really important to me. And I know the answer to this, and it's not my most favorite. But we were told for years prior to this session that we would be voting to put together a program that the feds have to approve, and then it would come back to the legislature for yet another vote. And have things changed?
Well, it depends. That's up to us to decide. Do we want to do that or not? What we've heard from constituents at the start is, no, we want more information before you go forward.
Yes.
So we try to get more information. Like, we don't want more information. We want you to decide things at the front. So if we if we say we need more information, then we need to have the study, then we need to have that come back to us to get a final approval. But if we want all this information before we even cast that first vote, before we even allow people to go out and investigate, if we want to dictate outcomes and determine, then maybe we don't need a second vote at the back end as well. So that's the push and pull of this. Like, what?
And I have made it clear to you,
Yeah.
to leadership, that I would like that second vote.
Right.
And I will continue to advocate for that. And I recognize that I am one of 151 in the House, right?
Yes.
Okay. So with that said, he has been hearing me for years. You have not.
That's true.
So I'm going to lay it all out there. These are my feelings about tolls. I have said consistently that I need to look at the net economic impact to my residents in order to make a decision on tolls. With that, over the past few years, I have been advocating loudly, as I know you have as well, in order to, if we are going to implement tolls, that in addition, we could have a straight income tax credit for residents in Connecticut, that we can also look at having an additional break for small businesses, that possibly we could look into trucks only. These are all things that I was interested in to look at how we can further reduce the immediate impact of tolls on residents. And in order to do that, I needed to look at a few things. I could talk about those ways to reduce the costs of tolling to my residents, but I also had to look at, if we didn't institute tolls, what would that cost my residents as well? And so that's where we have to get into, what does tolls cost on a daily basis, and what does it cost residents on a long-term basis if we
Before
don't
we
institute
shift to
tolls?
that, could I just go back and make one point, that none of the three bills before the legislature currently has a trigger where there's a plan that goes down to the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation approves what it's going to approve, and then the legislature has to vote after a full study, so we'll know those real impacts.
Right.
The legislature has to vote with the people watching on that new plan after there's been a new unbiased study to say what we're actually going to get from out-of-staters, what the cost is going to be compared to those
And
things.
I agree with that 100%, and I am advocating at the top of my lungs that we do come back for another vote.
Well,
in the
I would urge you to advocate for a clean bill that authorizes us to take a plan down to Washington, get the results, boom, and then there can be a new bill in the next legislature voting so that the public really knows what we're voting for and aren't buying, as they used to say, a pig at a poke.
Mr. Chairman, is that possible?
That is completely possible. In fact, it's the bill that we worked on for the last few years that they also didn't support at that point in time. And with, like, this year, we thought, like, well, how do we address the concerns that they were raising prior to this year, which is we need more information. We don't allow the federal government and DOT to develop this thing without providing guidance. And
Who is they?
Yankee Institute, in addition to a lot of the anti-toll opposition that we've heard. And so we actually thought, how can we do both? How can we both provide the information that people are asking for and that the folks who are opposed to tolls? And there are many reasons why folks feel strongly against tolls.
Right.
Like, I don't think we should discount that. And I'm not going to be excited to pay tolls either.
Woohoo, tolls.
Right. Like,
I
no
can't
one,
afford it.
No one feels that way. But the reality is, like, we've got to address our infrastructure somehow We want to develop an option for our constituents. We need this federal waiver in order to do that. So what can we determine in advance of the feds looking at it?
So let's
And that
talk
can-
about
Wait,
what the, just
I
give me a
need to
sec.
respond just because the Yankee Institute does not support and has never supported the notion of just throwing a plan down to Washington, D.C. on the basis of a pro-tolls group study and then accepting whatever we get back. That's not Yankee's position. It's never been Yankee's position.
Excellent, good to know.
Thank you.
And so let's talk about then why we need to involve the feds and what it means to involve them. We talk about the environmental study. Okay, and I have to explain to everybody that the environmental study is not what happens to the turtles when we institute tolls. The environmental study is what happens to the environment around us, meaning secondary roads, businesses, and all those things. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Environment takes into place not so much air quality and water quality or the turtles and the birds, right? It takes into account the built environment around it. Are you disproportionately impacting certain areas over others? Are you causing diversions from the roadway onto secondary streets? Is your impact on lower economic, socioeconomic income groups felt more strongly than it is passed throughout the region?
And so the way it would work is that a bill would be put forth and possibly voted out.
Yep.
And then it would go to the feds for this environmental study.
That's right.
And in that environmental study, is it true that we would have to have town halls and such and hear from residents around the state who would be impacted by these tolls?
Yes, there'd be a public hearing around every location of a gantry.
Wait a minute.
Not every location, within the corridor of the gantry. So not every location maybe, but there would be a federal public hearing process that we'd have to go through to inform people of where those toll gantries would be and the impacts.
So ultimately, people will have the ability to speak up again
Yes.
once we have that actual plan,
Well, I
right?
think the current legislation would require one public hearing in each quarter, so maybe 2 or 3 statewide.
Is that how you read the legislation?
Well, the federal authorization is what dictates this. We can go above and beyond if we think that that is insufficient, but the federal qualifications essentially say that it's how you determine a corridor. So is 95 in its entirety a corridor, or is Fairfield County a corridor, Greater New Haven?
Gotcha.
And so that's all guidance we have to get from the federal government as we move
But
forward.
we can do more than what they require.
Yeah, we could put in our legislation that we can go above and beyond and actually have public hearings much more frequently in more locations.
Okay, so I'm going to make a promise to my constituents. If this gets voted out, I will push to have one for my residents in my district so that we can talk about that. And that's if it gets voted out either with or without my vote, because I'm still unsure.
Well, why not push for lots more public hearings and a long, reasonable process with another vote when we get back the information back from the DOT
Well, this is what we're
before
talking about.
authorizing anything else?
This is what we're talking about.
Right.
That study would so it would authorize the study. The study would then go around and talk to everyone, right? And then the results come out, and then that's voted on.
But what you're saying is, if it gets voted out, you can change. There are 3 bills. They're going to become one bill. One bill is going to get voted on. We can make all of those. We can't. I obviously don't get a vote. But the people, you fine legislators can make those changes now. You can make them to the bill that gets if a bill gets voted out.
We are about 45 minutes into our full conversation, and you're still
Absolutely.
calling me a fine legislator.
Well, and a fine lady.
It's a win.
And a fine moderator.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But he's right.
Yeah.
He's right. can do that.
I don't disagree. Like we could develop a robust public hearing process. The idea that we're going to have 1,000 of these things, like we know what that's intended to make this thing take 10 years.
Right.
But we don't need 1,000.
No, but we can
And
have
what
some.
we certainly need more than 2 or 3.
Yes.
Right. And so like we can figure
Reasonable.
that out. Where we struggled in the past is people want to create an unreasonable process and say, well, if they'd only do
That's
this.
obstruction.
Right. If they'd only do this, we'd be okay with it. And in all honesty, they're trying to create as many obstacles as possible,
Correct.
not a reasonable process.
Is they us again?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Ooh. No. So I want to talk about that obstruction, okay? Because this is important. We can vote on tolls, whether we're a yes or no. Votes it out, doesn't vote it out. What happens if it doesn't pass? What do? We still have 300 bridges that are deficient. We still have the need for our roads. We still have an insolvent special transportation fund by 2024 under the current budget and 2022 under the governor's proposal. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, that's a problem. So let's say ultimately tolls doesn't pass. What are we left with?
So you end up with a few options. We can increase the gas tax by about 53 cents.
What?
Yeah, I mean, if
We can, I would like you to say that again. We increase the gas tax by how much?
53 cents.
Okay, so let's just let's round it down to 50 for easy
Sure.
math.
Yep.
Okay. So what are we paying now? I just filled up today.
25
$700 a gallon.
That's what it feels like,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's
so
tough.
I will be honest with you. I've been so honest with my constituents. Sometimes I can only put $20 in my tank at a time, right? So now if we raise it by 50 cents, there's a chance I may not come in for a vote because I don't have the gas to get there.
That's right.
That's a problem.
And Connecticut residents would pay the full freight because no one from out of state would stop in
No,
our
you don't
state
have
to
to.
fill up.
It's a zippity-doo right through.
Why don't people stop in the state?
'Cause it's a zippity-doo
Because
right
we
through.
already have such high gas taxes?
We actually have a lower gas tax in a lot of our surrounding
Well,
states.
then why doesn't anybody stop in Connecticut? to
They
get
actually
gas?
do, and it's
Didn't you just say that people don't stop?
no,
in
no. If
Connecticut?
if
Oh,
we
okay.
increase the gas tax by 50 cents,
So people will avoid Connecticut if things in Connecticut are made more expensive, like driving across Connecticut.
if you're driving from Boston to New Jersey, or you're going down from Boston to Disney World with your kids and driving through, if you could avoid filling up because that one specific tax is substantially more than it is in our surrounding states, you would probably consider doing that.
There's an app for that.
Yeah, there is, right?
There's an app for that that tells you where to fill up and where not to fill up on your trip.
There's an app for avoiding toll roads, too.
Is there really?
Yeah, there is.
I might have to download
There you
that.
go.
But okay, so all right, so if we don't institute tolls, we can do 50 cents gas tax. I'm a no. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately, what we saw in the last 2 weeks when the
Yeah.
Republicans released their plan was we both agree, Republicans and Democrats agree that the current funding system doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
They both said we think on the tolling side about $800 million a year in net revenues. It might be a little less once we get the federal approvals on this. The Republicans have said we need between $600 and $700 million a year in additional spending on transportation. We both agree it doesn't work. We need to do something. We just disagree about the most prudent way to fund those investments.
So let's talk
Well,
about.
hold on. We forgot about one very important way to go about funding these investmts. At the beginning of either this show or the last show, we're taping them together, and I apologize. But at the beginning of this discussion, you highlighted in your Ask Me Anything section.
Yep. Hashtag Ask Liz.
I'm sorry, hashtag Ask Liz. You posed the proposition, why haven't we been talking about spending cuts yet? And the reason, and it's a beautiful point to make for our listeners and to your constituents, is because we haven't gone through the process of cutting spending yet. Right. That's still ahead of us, which means that in this session, we have the opportunity to cut hundreds of millions of dollars in spending. We're one of the highest tax states in the country. Let's look for savings before we add an entire new structure of expensive structure and taxes and
so
fees.
I'll give you that. What would you cut?
What would I cut?
Yep.
Well, one of the places I would start is by looking at those administrative costs. That was in our break.
That was in our break.
Yes.
We'll get to that.
All
We'll
right.
get to that because I want to make sure we talk about that.
I
but
would look to cutting administrative and labor costs. I would look to bringing our general costs into line with Northeastern averages. There's a lot.
And you think that we can get $800 million out of that?
I don't think we could. I don't have a number off the top of my head, but I think that we can
You're
get
the
very close.
policy guy.
But I'm not all the numbers guy.
Okay.
But we can get hundreds of millions of dollars. Then we can divert that car sales tax back into the special transportation fund. That gets us a lot of the way back there.
Well,
there's
some ideas there.
Yeah.
There's some ideas there. And I can guarantee that as a legislature, throughout the budget process, we'll be looking at things like that.
That's right.
Who knows what's going to ultimately come out of it, but we all agree that it needs to be looked at, and we will look at those things. However, when we're looking at tolls, and we're looking at the choice of voting out tolls, supporting prioritized progress, or doing nothing. We've talked about tolls, we haven't talked about prioritized progress, and we haven't talked about doing nothing. So let's talk about the prioritized progress plan. Sounds good. It says no tolls, but and if we could get away with really good quality of life without instituting tolls, I'm thrilled with that. And I would be able to support that. But my concern is bonding. First, can you explain for our viewers really quickly what bonding is and what it means for Connecticut?
So bonding is the tool that we use as a legislature and as a state to support our long-term obligations. Building roads, purchasing large-scale equipment, doing renovations, repairs to state capital.
Capital expenditures.
Capital expenditures, what we do when you borrow for your home improvements, or we're making substantial long-term investments in our state. We bond, we go out to the market, we sell bonds, we collect the revenue up front, we do the big long-term project at that time in one swoop. We spend billions of dollars trying to maintain our road network every year. And we use the revenues that we collect from our tax revenue to go out to bond, secure those dollars, rebuild a highway, rebuild a bridge.
It's a really complicated system that maybe if we're going to boil it down really easy, we could say it's like taking out a mortgage on your home. It's like opening a credit card. Basically, you get your money, but you got to pay for it long term with interest.
That's right. And thankfully, as a state, we have really good interest rates at this point in time, some of the best interest rates we've had. So our debt and long-term costs associated with that aren't as bad as they had been in the past, and certainly not as bad as if you opened up a credit card.
Right. Well, thank God for that. But with that said, is it going to stay that low?
Likely not. We recently
It's variable, correct?
It's variable. We had a bond rating approval for the first time in a number of years just this past cycle. When you look at prioritized progress and what the Republican plan wishes to do, which again we all recognize it's going to cost $600 to $700 million extra, bond rating agencies are terrified by that plan.
What will happen if we bond $600, $700 million for the Special Transportation Fund? What then happens to our ratings? Which is ultimately, if we're trying to compare it to how someone uses their own credit worthiness, it's like your credit score.
So there's a few options. If you take the governor's proposal to go on a debt diet, saying we bond way too much, we need to bring our annual bonding levels down, to $700 to $800 million per year. The Republican plan says all of that's going to go towards transportation, which means we don't do schools, we don't do community colleges, we don't invest in economic development programs, clean water programs, brownfield remediation. We don't invest in the basic.
So the Republican plan, which I want to
say that Yankee Institute has not come out in support of the prioritized progress plan either. I want to make that clear.
We don't speak for the Republicans. But I may have misunderstood the prioritized progress bill, but it says no money for anything except roads. Is that in that legislation?
It is. If it says essentially, if you're going to spend that many hundreds of millions of dollars on transportation, prioritized progress at that level, crowds out every other bonding source that you have.
But you're presuming that there's no other money. So there's a prioritization system. Does the governors in your plan have no priorities in it? Everything gets funded?
No, everything has priorities. We also have a dedicated revenue stream that would support those priorities.
But isn't there also bonding in all of these tolling plans? Aren't we going to, as you say, run up the credit card the minute that we have a saleable tolling program and thereby lock in the tolling program for generations yet unborn to create bills for them?
Yeah, with a dedicated revenue source.
So we're talking about bills for our children with bonding or bills for our children with tolling. And the real difference between those two plans is one has tolling and the other doesn't. But all the bonding and debting, that's really a side issue.
But then we can no longer prioritize things like education. Here in Cheshire, we are looking at, do you know that our newest school in Cheshire was built in 1970?
I thought you were on the fence about this.
I am.
So
but
you're telling
my
me
concern is education.
you're telling me you're on the fence, but you're accepting the proposition, and we're doing no spin here tonight, that unless we have tolls, we will have no money to construct anything else in the state except roads.
That is not what I said. What I said was it will absolutely, if we're going on a debt diet and we have to spend this $800 million to go towards the tolling, there is definitely going to be less money for us to build a new school here in Cheshire. I am very concerned about that, and so are my constituents. And that has to play a part.
Tolling brings in money. If you assume that the only place to get money is through tolling, and there are no other options, then not having tolling will decrease the total pile of money. right? That's just an equation. You're saying if this is the only option and we don't do that option, then we won't have what that option provides. But it's the exclusion of all other possibilities, including cheaper revenue sources. If it turns out that out-of-state tolls aren't going to bring in because of federal authorizations or because the study was biased in favor of a finding in favor of tolls, if those things aren't true, then eventually you get to, and it doesn't take very long, the costs of construction and maintenance are higher than we're going to get from out-of-staters, which makes tolls the single most expensive way to raise the revenue that we're talking about.
Which could absolutely be an issue, and one of the reasons why I'm on the fence.
And something that we should figure out before any of us agrees to. It is something that we should figure out, which is why I'm going back to the fact that I would really like to see a second vote in the legislature. I mean, we're not saying anything different. We're all actually in agreement, is what it's sounding like. It's just one. So are you committed to a second vote, Tolan?
I'm
sorry, Tolan. I'm so sorry.
It's a meme.
Representative.
You made a meme.
Are you?
It is a very common. It turns out when your name is Roland,
they call you Tolan,
and you're pushing for tolls, it just Freudian slips turn into Toland pretty easily. It's easy.
Sorry for that. That was dreadful.
Look, I think we have two options. We can either define this program from the beginning and have a vote and say you've got to come back with a program that meets this criteria, or we say go get the federal waiver program, leave it open-ended until you get it, and then come back to us and present what they say. Like, defining it on both ends puts us in an untenable position where you can't get anything approved. You have this legislature that would vote on this bill in 2019. You will have a different legislature with different members in 2021, right? So if you're constraining it based upon what this group of people thinks in 2019, and then also having to meet that moving target of what people will think in 2021 when it comes back, and well, I never would have signed on to that thing in 2019, so why would I sign on to it now? Like, we either define the program entirely right now and say if you can meet these criteria, then we'll institute that program. Or we say, here's broadly what we want you to come back with, give us the final details, and allow us to vote on it at that point in time. You have to choose one or the other.
Right now,
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap that up quickly. We're running out of time, so finish that so we can go to a quick rapid fire.
My understanding of these bills is that right now it has none of those protections. And I look forward to those protections being included.
We are really working together here, and I'm proud of us all, the mom and me. But listen, I want to throw a couple things out here. A trip from Waterbury to Danbury, $600 a year, round trip. My husband, we live in Cheshire. My husband works in Danbury. I travel from Cheshire to Hartford, according to the governor's plan. From New Haven to Hartford, $800 a year. Yeah. We know that some random person somewhere has decided that it costs the average motorist $600 a year for bad roads here in Connecticut. I don't know the source of that. I don't know if I believe it. But bottom line is this. I am concerned that people like me, my constituents, are going to be eating peanut butter sandwiches and grilled cheeses for dinner because we have to pay to get to work. Whether we're paying to get to work through the gas tax or we're paying to get to work through tolls, it concerns me. At the same time, I don't want to saddle my kids with long-term debt by bonding our way out of this. The numbers here are it's $11 billion in interest over the course of a 30-year bond cycle. That equals $8,450 in interest payments alone per household in Connecticut, and $241 per year in interest alone. That's not even, and we're only talking interest. This is a big deal, and this is a big concern. I appreciate both of you being here to talk to me about this. I'm still going to do more digging.
Yeah.
I'm still going to ask more questions. You two are both on my speed dial.
I'm ready.
Anytime.
I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you.
And make sure to also go to lizlinehan.com so you can see my additional 1-hour interview with some other great people from the Yankee Institute, where we talk about peanut butter sandwiches and grilled cheeses a lot. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope we've answered a lot of your questions. If not, feel free to contact me, and we'll see you next time on Liz Linehan's News You Can Use.